Well, good morning, everybody. It appears that nobody has joined this morning, which is okay. That's not a problem at all. The reality is, some of you guys might have some stuff going on and you might be busy. So you might be watching this recording later. Normally, obviously, if you guys watched these before, there's a bit of question and answer and dialogue back and forth. So let me just lay out then for you the coming questions that you guys should be watching if you're watching this video in order, so that it can provide you just with some insights. Let me start first with the theology exams 23 and 24. We're thinking about the church, and obviously ACBC is a parachurch organization, but they do believe in the centrality of the local church. Even recently, the 2021 ACBC conference was O Church Arise. And that's one of the things I love about the organization at ACBC. It is still completely committed to the ministry of the local church. Sometimes you get involved with the parachurch organization and they're trying to replace, they're trying to supplement the local church. And that's not what's happening with ACBC. And so this first question, question number 23, is just to provide a description of the church. The second one is, what role does the church play in counseling? So similar but different questions. And so for question 23, you're just describing what this body is, this church is. And they're wanting to ensure that you at least have a framework to think through the church. It's this, universal body. It's a local assembly, et cetera. It's under the authority of Christ. And so it's a pretty straightforward answer, if you guys follow the outline there. Question 24, then, what role does it play in the counseling process? That one tends to be one where folks miss a couple of these things. We've given you a very simple outline. The church is the pillar and support of truth. So how do we understand the truths that we need to apply from counseling? Well, the church is that pillar and support, obviously coming from God's word, but the church is the one teaching and inculcating those truths to its members. The church, is there to equip and to train up its leaders. So where should people who are doing biblical counseling, where are people coming from? They ought to be coming from the church. Now, of course, other agencies such as seminaries, such as ACBC, such as Faith Biblical Counseling, play an important part in all of that. But primarily, where does spiritual formation happen? It happens in the local church. And then just looking at some of the outline points there, where I really encourage people to highlight and hammer on, I would use all five of those things. But the church is there to keep members accountable. And so you're going to want to say something. It will come up later in the counseling exam, but you will want to say something on this particular question about the church discipline process, right? If the church is doing biblical counseling, one of the roles that the church has is to hold its members to account. Church discipline is never about punishment. It's always about restoration. It's always about helping people become more like Christ. It's a gift. But counseling does play a part in that. And generally, that if somebody is on the path of church discipline, Lord willing, they would also be in the counseling room. They would be meeting with a counselor. They would be talking with a pastor to some degree in that. So you definitely want to highlight some of that. We give you Matthew 18, we give you 1 Corinthians 5. You might even consider bringing in the restoration of the licentious man in 2 Corinthians as well, just to show how that process works. After that, you're going to work with Rob Green on the counseling exam. So hopefully you're feeling pretty excited that we're moving from theology to counseling, which means we're like at a halfway mark for sure. I did mention this last night, if you watched the recordings, that the counseling exam 1 and 2 are questions, unfortunately, that people often get wrong. And they get wrong for a number of reasons. Number one, when they go through question number 1, they do not list the key elements. So there's more to question 1 than just the key elements, but they don't list the key elements. And you should remember the key elements from your basic training. If not, that's okay. We've listed them for you. But you need to make sure that you have all 6 of the key elements tied in there. And so I'd encourage you to, even if it feels a bit repetitive, if you're like, man, this is basic, they're looking to know that you have those key elements in there. That there's some other elements to the question about explaining what counseling is, etc. Those are essential. People tend not to miss that stuff as much. They tend to miss the key elements. And so my encouragement to you, don't forget those things at all. And then question number two, people often miss what is the spirit, what is the nature of this question. If you look at the question, it says to identify strategies to build a relationship. So it's not arguing that you ought to build a relationship. So tell us why you think it's, you know, that you ought to build a relationship, right? You have that loving involvement with your counselee. What are the means? What are the methods that you would use to do that? And if this is going to be your if this is going to be your method, then tie that back to the Bible. And so we do that. You know, we list things like praying for the counselees, encouraging them, comforting them during hard times. We list those things, but a lot of times people want to use this question to argue why we ought to build a relationship. And these things that you list in question two, if you decide to not use some of these, which is totally fine, then you just need to know that there needs to be differences between them. A lot of times when I'm reading this, I'm like, hey, you've listed 6. Well done, good job. But the reality is you've kind of listed 2, and you've just kind of elaborated just a smidgen here, smidgen there. So I'd encourage you to think through that. Question number 8, again, the one that tricks up people sometimes. A lot of people do a great job describing the operations of the devil. But sometimes when it comes to the question of is there a difference between believers and unbelievers regarding the activity of the devil, they will say yes, but they won't necessarily describe how that is different. And then what do you do if you have a counselee, this is the last part of the question, who comes in his room and is telling you, or perhaps you even believe, that there's some demonic oppression happening here. And so the key there is we're never, as counselors, called to do battle with any sort of demonic oppression. We're never called to try to fight Satan. Our job is to evangelize. So if somebody comes in and they're unregenerate and they don't know Christ, our job is to evangelize them. And if they are a believer, our job is to encourage them to resist the devil, to flee him, and God will deliver. It's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward, but it is a bit of an answer that you have to work through systematically. And what ACBC is obviously trying to prevent is any sort of ministry of casting out demons. Now, you might be thinking, that's crazy. That would never come across my desk. And unfortunately, that's not the case. If you're doing community-based counseling like we are at Faith, I mean, I've had people tell me they believe that's what they need, and that's not what I provide. I provide biblical instruction. I provide biblical guidance and mentorship. I provide practical assignments. What I don't provide is exorcism. And then question 10, I just mentioned a few minutes ago that discipline would come up in the counseling exam. So that's question number 10. What role do you believe the church should play in discipline? What they're essentially trying to make sure is that you believe in church discipline. And they're wanting to know that if you're involved in a biblical church, will this church practice discipline? Now, it's not the most important defining characteristic of a church, but in our day and age, it has become less and less common to see biblical discipline being practiced. Either the church has abandoned it or they just go discipline crazy. Actually, John Street at the ACBC conference 2021 just talked about church discipline and highlighting those two extremes where one church won't do it, the other church gets, that's all they think being a church is about. And then we just recommend walking maybe through a story or an example. How would church discipline really play itself out, especially in the counseling process? Maybe you have an example from your own ministry. Maybe you have done this before as a pastor and walked through it. But paint a picture about what is the goal, what does it look like, how does it go forward. So that's the questions, guys. I mean, these are they shouldn't be too tricky. I realize that again, I'm on the call by myself. It's the first time for me, by the way. So I hope everybody's doing okay, and we will try to serve you guys any way we can. My plan is to be back at 11:30 Eastern time here on October the 9th to answer any questions that you guys may have, and then to prep you a little bit for the last sessions that you might. Just to remind you, if you do have a question that you're getting stumped on that you want me to look at, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to see if there's ways I can minister to you and to encourage you, to be praying for you, to go from there. So my hope is that you guys have a great day of watching these lectures. My hope is that you continue to move along the process, and my hope is that this time is encouraging to you. So take care. God bless, and we'll see you soon.